Hi, everyone. Dr. Victoria Scarbo here, speaking to you from the Seeds of Transformation Healing Center in Wareham, Massachusetts. And I want to talk to you tonight about this is a special topic for 2020, and that is Venus retrograde. Venus is actually going retrograde at 2:45 a.m. on the east coast of the U.S. on the 13th. That's tomorrow, early in the morning. And I want to go through some things with you so you can get a better understanding of what's ahead for us with Venus retrograde. So this is the symbol for Venus. It's the circle and the cross. The circle is spirit and the cross is matter. This is also symbolic of the mirror of Venus. A lot of depictions of Venus have her holding a mirror. That is an illusion, not illusion, alluding. That's alluding to her relationship function. In that, relationships are reflections of ourself. What we see in somebody else, in the eyes of the beloved, is the love that we have within us, and that exchange back and forth that is mirroring. That's a hard word to say. Okay, so Venus in astrology, Venus is the planet of love, essential needs, magnetic attraction. Venus is the feminine energy. Venus deals with our resources and our resourcefulness. Venus is the planet most concerned with relationships. That is the relationship with ourselves and our relationship with others. And Venus is also the ruler of Taurus and Libra. So this Venus retrograde is going to be especially powerful for those Venus rule signs. If you happen to have a Taurus ascendant or a Libra ascendant, Venus is the ruling planet of your chart. And so you will also have, this can also be a very deep and important time for you. So Venus is retrograde in Gemini from May 13th until June 24th, 25th. Okay. Venus is retrograde this time in Gemini. These are some of the themes that we could be questioning: how we communicate our needs, how we communicate in our relationships, the importance of facts, how we talk to ourselves. Do we talk to ourselves nicely? Do we talk to ourselves in terms that are not so nice? And in esoteric or soul-centered astrology, Venus is actually the ruling planet of the sign of Gemini. So on a soul level, this is a very profound time. Now, Venus retrogrades are the rarest of the planetary retrogrades. Venus is retrograde approximately 40 to 43 days every 18 months. So every 18 months, Venus goes retrograde. What's interesting about Venus retrograde period is if you follow Venus in the heavens through her retrogrades, 5 successive retrograde periods, she actually creates a pentagram in the sky. This retrograde period, this particular one, runs from May 13th to June 25th, 2020. It begins at 22 degrees of Gemini and backs all the way to 6 degrees of Gemini. The shadow period of this retrograde actually began back on April 9th, and it will go until July 29th. So what does that mean? What is the shadow period? Well, we have a pre-shadow, we have a retrograde, and then we have a shadow period. The pre-shadow is when Venus gets to the point where it's going to retrograde back to. So when Venus reached 6 degrees of Gemini, that was on April 9th, and that started the pre-shadow. So we may have started feeling this Venus retrograde at that time. Of course, Venus deals with relationships, Venus deals with money, Venus deals with love, Venus deals with our essential needs. We could have been feeling um, disruption in the force, in the field, right, at that time. And then tomorrow, May 13th, we start our retrograde period all the way to June. This retrograde is about 43 days long. It stations direct on June 25th and doesn't get out of shadow, means it doesn't reach 22 degrees of Gemini until July 29th. So this retrograde period from April to the beginning of April to the end of July. So that's April, May, June, July. That's 4 months, a 4-month period where we're dealing with this Venus retrograde. This is a picture of the Venus of, I think it's Wilderdorf or Willendorf. And this was an ancient symbol of Venus. She was, of course, a fertility goddess. And this was back in the day of the matriarchal times. This was considered a powerful woman. So this is the Venus retrograde chart. I erected it for the United States of America because I do live in America. And we can see that the Venus goes retrograde. When it goes retrograde, it's actually in the 4th house. The 4th house is the house of the people. It's house of the land. It's the house of farming, things like that. It's also the house of the people. And so we have a Venus retrograde. We're going to have to be rethinking our values around all those issues. This is also real estate, okay, in this house. We can see that Venus is actually in a very close conjunction to Vesta. Vesta is what we devote ourselves to or what we focus our attention on. It's also within orb. It's wide, 10 degrees of the North Node in Gemini. The North Node just moved into Gemini on the 5th. And so this is all part of that sort of looking at the facts, ma'am, and letting go of some beliefs that no longer serve us with the South Node in Sagittarius. We also have a pretty tight square between Neptune, which is the higher octave of Venus, and Venus, okay? This is a first quarter crisis in action square, building the foundations for compassion, building the foundations for caring about others, being our brothers and sisters keepers. The square of Neptune to Venus can also confuse and confound. And it can also create illusions and delusions. So this is a time when we can't really trust what we're seeing on the outside, but we need to look within. And that's all retrogrades are about, looking within. And so with Venus retrograde, we're looking inside of ourselves for our answers, for our sense of worth, for our love. We have to find love within our own hearts. We can't really expect somebody else to love us if we can't give ourselves that grace. Okay. So this is the Venus retrograde and the chart of the United States. And what's interesting is the Venus is moving through, this is the Sibley chart, okay? Moving through the 7th house. Venus through the 7th house is both our partners and our open enemies. And so we will be reevaluating that. It actually does retrograde back into the 6th house, which is the house of the healthcare and the house of the military, the house of service. So we will be probably getting more facts on and having to go over facts and go over the data that we've accumulated through this pandemic that we're experiencing. So that's part of that. But this Venus is actually very close to Mars in the United States chart. Mars is our aggressive nature in the United States. In Gemini, we tend to be split. We tend to split our energy. It is said that if we don't have an enemy outside of us, we will fight each other. So there's a lot of projection. There's a lot of projection of anger and a lot of projection of, the other is the devil when it comes to having Mars in that house. And with Venus there, it's something we're going to have to look at, and we're going to have to really take a real deep and close look at this in this country. So let's take a look here. This is the chart for Venus direct. This is also Washington, D.C. This is June 25th. Actually 2:48 a.m. in the morning, like 3 minutes off when it went retrograde, right? And we can see that Venus is in the first house for Washington, D.C. at that time. And it's actually in a pretty nice trine to the asteroid Juno, which is the relationship and partnership asteroid, in Libra, which is the relationship, which is a relationship sign. So that's pretty neat. And if we widen the orb, it actually creates a grand air trine with Saturn, which is now retrograde and moving out of almost out of Aquarius. Almost out of Aquarius. Okay, so, and of course, this is one of the most famous Venus pieces of art. This is the Venus de Milo. So beautiful, but she cannot defend herself. She has no arms. So while she's beautiful, this statue's always made me a little bit uncomfortable. And this is Venus direct. Is this Venus direct? No, I have to find Venus. Yes, this is when Venus goes direct. And Venus is going direct in the 6th house. And of course, this is happening on the 24th of June. Okay, Venus does rule money, by the way. So I want to just talk a little about some of the Venus things that are happening to the U.S. chart. I'll look at 2 things specifically: exact conjunctions of Venus to planets in the Sibley chart. So Venus retrograde goes over the U.S. chart. Transiting Venus will conjoin the U.S. Mars 3 times, stationing retrograde within 28 minutes of natal Mars. That is what, a third of a degree. So the first time that Venus conjoined Mars was actually on May 8th. Venus was moving direct very, very slowly. And now she's slowed down and she's turning around tomorrow. But during this time on May 8th, and we have to remember that this happened, this Venus going over Mars happened in the 7th house. These are the things that were in the news that day. It says the Department of Labor released grim monthly job numbers this week. The U.S. unemployment rate jumped to 14.7% in April, the highest level since the Great Depression. National outrage over the killing of a Black man in Georgia leads to 2 arrests. Politicians, including Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, calls the death a lynching and condemned police for not taking immediate action against the suspects who were caught on video. And the Department of Justice dropped criminal cases against Michael Flynn, President Trump's former national security advisor. So all of these things happened when Venus went over Mars. On the 17th, Venus will go over Mars again. This time she will be going retrograde. So that's 4 or 5 days from now. And then eventually Venus goes direct on June 25th. And by July 28th, Venus is going over the natal Mars once again. So I feel as though some of the things that we see here will resolve themselves, or will become aware of some more stuff around these issues, including the killing of the young man in Georgia. We'll probably get more information on the unemployment and what's happening to the economy. And we will hear about the Department of Justice because I believe that the judge still has to judge it. The department wants to drop it, but I think it's up to the judge, if I'm correct about that. So I think we're going to hear something about that perhaps as early as the 17th. But I think a lot of this stuff will come to some sort of resolution or perhaps next step when we get to when Venus goes over Mars directly. Okay, and here we have Venus. Here's Venus as it conjoins Mars in the chart. This is when Venus was going direct. Okay, and we can see Mars here on the Pallas Athena, social justice for the United States. Also Mars close to the moon of the United States, a lot of irritation. People are really irritated at this point. All right, so let's see what else we have here. So transiting Venus will also conjoin the US Uranus 3 times. And this is important in a roundabout way, because in mythology, Aphrodite, or Venus, was born from the white foam produced by the severed genitals of Uranus, or the god of heaven, after his son Kronos, or Saturn, threw them into the sea. So there's a connection between Venus and Uranus. On April 14th of 2020, Venus, moving direct at that time, went over the Uranus of the United States in the 6th house of the military. And this is what happened on that day. Trump says that the federal government, the president, has absolute power. A sailor from the USS Theodore Roosevelt died from coronavirus complications. Trump halts funding of the WHO, saying they mismanaged the pandemic. And both Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders endorsed Joe Biden on that day. So those are some of the sort of themes that we see here. Of course, Uranus is sudden, out of nowhere. It's awakening. I think that when Trump said that he has absolute power, people who thought that maybe he wouldn't go there maybe realized that he's going in that direction, whether we like it or not. Of course, the sailor on the ship there dying from complications of coronavirus, we can see that because Uranus is in the 6th house of the military. Trump not funding the WHO. Venus is the planet of money and resources. And so we have that. Venus, when Venus is retrograde, it will be going over Uranus again on June 11th, 2020. And then when Venus goes direct, it will be going over Uranus on July 9th, 2020. And so we can keep our eyeballs peeled for what that's going to mean. And here we have one of the most famous Venuses, Venus on a half shell, as some people call it, but this is The Birth of Venus by Botticelli. I've actually been to the Uffizi, and I did see this in person, and it was fabulous, absolutely gorgeous. And here we have the United States chart, and we have Venus sitting on Uranus, that first pass that happened on, what was that, the 14th of April. And I thought this was cute. This is called Venus in Suburbia. I thought it was really cute. It's in a little pool on a half shell. All right. So Venus retrograde in your chart, what does it mean? Well, it's a especially powerful time if you happen to be born with a Venus retrograde natally. If you're born with a Venus retrograde natally, it's very hard for you to feel loved from the outside until you do the inner work. With Venus retrograde in your chart, you need to look at your natal Venus and the aspects you have to Venus. Any issues with your natal Venus will come up during this retrograde period because Venus is a focal planet in your chart. As we are all reviewing our essential needs, our relationships, our resources, and our sense of self-worth. You have to look to see in your chart which house or houses Venus retrograde is moving through. In my case, it moves through my 11th and my 10th houses. but it would be different depending on where Gemini is in your chart. So you look at these houses because these are the areas of life that will be most likely be affected during this retrograde period. We also have to look at the houses in your chart ruled by Venus. Those would be houses that have Taurus and Libra on the cusp. And we could see considerations and changes and things happening in those areas of life as well. Maybe a little less direct than where Venus is sitting, but all the same, we can see that. Okay, so I just sort of wanted to go over that with you guys. I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, you can put them below, or you can contact me on my at my email, vickyscurbo@gmail.com. If you would like a reading, if you would like to know what Venus is doing in your chart or how it's going to affect your chart, you can certainly do that with me. All the links will be below in the descriptor box below. And have a great Venus retrograde. This is a time of deep understanding, looking within, looking into our own heart. I did do a tarot reading on this, and it came up. I think it was a really good reading. So if you haven't seen that one, I would suggest you watch it because you can get an even deeper understanding of what Venus retrograde is going to mean for us. Okay, guys, it's late. I'm tired, and I'm going to go to bed. Have yourself a great night. Have yourself a wonderful Venus retrograde. We're going to move through this together. Namaste.